Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Reed, the Education Specialist with the Oracle Applications and Technology Users Group. I'm very excited to welcome you all to today's session hosted by the multinational General Ledger Applications Desktop Integrator, SIGs, called Integrations in EBS and Oracle Cloud ERP, the what, the when, and the how. Before we dive in, I'd like to briefly introduce everyone to OATUG in case you're new to our programming. We are a community of Oracle users and we provide education, networking, and support to our members. Make sure to save the date for our Sun conference in June. It will be at the Creve Royale Resort in Orlando from June 11th to the 14th. Just a quick reminder for today's webinar, you will be on mute throughout the session. However, you are welcome to send questions at any time through the chat, which we will address at the end. If you're interested in receiving CPE credit, you will need to be logged into the session for at least 50 minutes and post in the chat at least one question. We are recording this session, and the recording as well as the slide deck will be available to OATUG members in the knowledge base. You'll see the link for that in the chat area. And now I'd like to turn it over to today's speakers, Thomas Simkis and Lee with Creole Consulting, and Mohan Hans Kolbe and Seamus Morin with Cilantro Systems. Thank you so much for presenting, and you can take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. This is Tom Simkis speaking. Mohan, do you want to hop down to the next slide real quick? So we've done two series so far on EBS and Cloud and some similarities and differences. This is the third. I will point out that some of the panelists, myself, Lee Briggs, Mohan Iyer, will be in Orlando next month for the Ascend conference. If you have not yet registered for Ascend, there is still time to do so. There are a few hotel rooms left at the sister hotel to the main venue, but it is a wonderful session, great place to meet your coworkers as well as some wonderful consultants and get some questions answered. So what we've been doing is talking about if you're running EBS, you know, is it true that you need to get to Oracle Cloud? Certainly, if you talk to Oracle, they will tell you you do. But you know, is that actually a true statement? And we've been kind of looking at some differences from the application standpoint. Hans and Seamus did a wonderful presentation last month to highlight some of the key similarities and key differences that affect Oracle Cloud and EBS from a multinational standpoint. And we're going to have Mohan today talk about integrations. So that's what we've been talking about. We can go to the next slide. So as Jamie introduced, we call this the collaborative SIG. We have 3 SIGs working together on this session. We did this quite a bit before COVID, and hopefully we'll continue to do it, certainly going on in the future. But my name is Tom Simkis. I'm the Director of Cloud Consulting for Creole Consulting. I'm the co-chair, along with Hans Kolbe, of the multinational SIG. I've been working with Oracle for a long time. And working with Cloud since it was generally released in 2013. I hosted and led the first session along with Lee Briggs. I'll let Lee introduce himself, and then I'd like Hans and Seamus, and then Mohan, you can introduce yourself and take it away. Lee, you want to go ahead?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. So I've been working with the Oracle application since 2001. I actually started working on 11.5.9. That was the first application, but similar to Tom, since 2013, when Cloud became generally available, I've been focusing on Cloud full time. I am an Oracle ace within the apps and apps technology area, actually focusing on Cloud. So I think we're one of, Tom and I both, 2 of, I think there were 6 at the last count within the Fusion apps. I also am the coordinator of the ADI, Application Desktop Integrator and Report Manager Special Interest Group. Hans, I'll pass to you.
Second. Hi. Thank you. I'm Hans Kolbe. I'm the founder of Cilantro Systems. We started in 2001. I have worked with all of you guys, Thomas, Lee, and Mohan, and Seamus for a long time together. And we started or restarted the multinational special interest group. By now it's 20 years ago, and had great success really in working with Oracle in talking about different ways of implementing Oracle on-premise and now Oracle Cloud in multi-country situations, shared services, local compliance, international banking, intercompany transactions. Those are our specialties. And integrations has been one of the big topics over the last 5 years. I believe that's where the new trick of the world is going to be. How do you integrate this from different systems? I'm looking forward. I'm going to be in Orlando also. I'm looking forward to meeting all of you in person. Thank you. Seamus, you want to go next?
Okay. Hi, I'm Seamus Moran. I'm a UK accountant, a chartered accountant in the UK, CPA in California. I've spent 25 years working on systems, working as a controller in Europe and in the US. I joined Oracle in '95 and I stayed there until 2019, where I advised the engineers on what they needed to build for accounting purposes. Whether they listened or not is something else. I've had great fun in my life. I totally enjoyed all of that. Thank you.
Mohan.
Thank you. My name is Mohan Iyer, and I'm an ERP architect working on the cloud from a year after Thomas and Lee started. 2014 was when I started working in the cloud, and I've been focusing on that. I do work with some customers who are also using EBS, so kind of have a foot in both the kind of regions, if you might want to call it. And I'm happy to be working with all of these folks on presenting this to you folks. And we're talking today about integrations. Like Thomas said, this is session 3. There is a session 4, which is actually at the OAUG conference in Florida. So we're going to talk about integrations in EBS and Oracle Cloud today, and I'm going to walk you through what I think is a high-level comparison between how you would do or you did integrations in EBS and how you would need to do that in the cloud. So there's quite a bit of a difference in the landscape. There's quite a lot of difference between the capabilities. So let's hope this gives you a good overview, and obviously it will lead to questions, and we are here to answer as much as we can. So this is session 3, like Thomas said. Lee and Thomas presented the first one on reporting. Seamus presented the second one on general multinational capabilities and comparatives, and this is the one on integrations. The fourth one is going to be on general functionality differences between or functional differences between EBS and cloud, which will be on Sunday, June 11th in Orlando. Oracle E-Business has been up and running for a lot of years, and it's also been touted as being running or will be available for the next 10 years as well. So that means you have a lot of people who have experience with EBS, and one of the main benefits touted by Oracle on the cloud ERP is that it's got out-of-box connectivity and capability plus functionality that a lot of people want. Now, how true that is and how people generally decide whether they want to move from EBS to cloud is a completely different discussion, and it might take up probably a whole day if we start that discussion. But having said that, what we're trying to do in this session is try and give you a comparison on how we could at least make the decision and make the calls as to what's capable and what's not. This is not going to decide whether you move to the cloud or not. It's more about if you are on the cloud and you were on EBS, what are the differences you would see specifically to the tune of the integrations that you need to do. So typical integration scenarios. I mean, today's environment is leading us towards more of best of breed. People use Salesforce for doing their sales opportunities, and then they pull in orders into Oracle, or they do HR systems which are outside of Oracle, and then they pull in the employee information for whatever you need on the ERP. Have third-party logistics people who do shipments. You have payment integrations that you do with the financial institutions. These are a few of the ones that typically come to mind or on the top of most people's mind. There are other integrations that might happen, which include, invoices that come in from external systems, AR invoices, journal entries that come in from. All of those are an open question when we talk about integrations. Just to put a perspective on data integrations, here's what happens today in the world of exchange of data. You get them from websites where it is, secure. You get them from medical records. You get them from mobile devices. You get them from, devices which actually do manufacturing stuff, and there's just a whole load. And then obviously there's stuff which happens when there's no data from a file, right? So there's quite a bit of integration needs that come up based on what a lot of people use. There has been in the past people who've used a single system which is all integrated and everything is kind of built into that one system, but now that's kind of getting out there where people are using multiple systems, so data is stored in different places. The integration portion that we're going to talk about is just the, I should say, the technological capability of pulling in data. It does not, we're not going to talk about how do you manage what you do, not going to talk about what should be your data source or your source of truth. It's primarily going to talk about what you need to do to get data in. So just a summary and a comparison. On EBS, depending on who you ask, you had no capability to actually integrate, or you had all, because you had interface tables, you had access to all the tables that you needed to, and you could actually do almost anything that you wanted. But was there a framework that you could use? And depending on who you talk and what documentation they've read, you would get the answer yes or no. Because there was a document, there was always some kind of framework that Oracle had suggested, which till release 12, when EDR, or when the whole concept of being able to do patching on the fly came about, people did not necessarily need to adhere to actually that framework, and people started to work on doing their own data sets, pulling in data as they needed. And you had a lot of people who had experience. Like I said, EBS has been around for 30 years, so there's just so many people who have mountains of knowledge about the backend tables. On the cloud, however, you do not have access to the backend tables. There is no way that you're going to be able to do what you did in EBS. That's the first differentiation that you need to accept and understand, that you will not be able to do anything in the tables in the backend. The only way you can do anything that you need for data is with APIs or REST services. You have FPDI templates, you have ADFDI templates, you have business events, SOAP services, and then you have the integration cloud. Now, all of this sits on a framework which is called an integration platform. And OIC, the last bullet point here on the right-hand side, is Oracle's solution or Oracle's service for integration. There are other services that provide this integration platform, and we'll talk briefly about some of them downstream in the next set of slides. But REST APIs and services are what you need to use in the cloud to actually integrate, as opposed to what you could do. That does not mean that you didn't have any of these APIs or services in EBS. You did, but then you had to actually focus on trying to design that before you did it. A lot of people just said, hey, I have access to the tables, I'm just going to pull in data with SQL Loader. Excuse me. So what's the basis on the assumption that we're making here, right? Availability of a wide range of resources. EBS has been around for so long. There are a lot of people who know EBS really well. They know the backend tables, and that was very easy for them to do any input activity or collection activity of data and push it into the tables. A knowledgeable developer, like I said, could get and provide an input mechanism to any external data set. A couple of things that you need to think about. Data veracity, or responsibility of if the data was correct in the right place with the right connections to other data sets in the system, was actually something that the developer or the consumer had to take care of. Cases of inconsistent data were common. So you could get data in and then find when you're trying to use that data, or when you're trying to see that data in the screen, you would get errors. I mean, not necessarily that it couldn't be fixed, it could. And that comes to the last point here. You could easily pull back incorrect data or fix it if needed, because you had access, complete access to the backend data tables. So that was EBS. You could do almost everything that you want, having complete access of the database and the schema that you had there. You come to cloud, you do not have access to the underlying table. And what that means is that you cannot do what you did in EBS. You have to use an existing framework of APIs, upload templates, and cloud services need to be used. What that means is that there is a framework and there is functionality and capabilities that have been provided so that you can actually interact with the data sets that you want to in the system and get data pulled in. So data veracity is managed by the available services, which means if you use REST APIs, or you use SOAP, or you use any of the business events, you could actually put data in, and you are actually creating these transactions as though you were creating it from the screen. So the capacity for you to fail on having inconsistent data were a lot less, right? Here's what we did in EBS, right? The old way. You had a whole bunch of pieces. You used to do some activities to get files in Excel or CSV or just a flat file. You do the preparation, and then you had this red box, which is dotted, where you did everything. You used SQL Loader, you did interface tables, you probably also did additional pieces that you wanted to do. And all of that could be done, massaging of the data before you actually push it into the interface table, or even in the interface table, you did some work and then push it into the base table. And you could then write, review, preload data as you wanted to, do whatever changes you wanted, and then you could view online or you could review standard reports, right? So, and then you had an ADI template that was part of the old EBS where you could upload journals and asset information. So the reason why the red box is because you had control over what you did with SQL Loader. You had control over how you prepared the data. You had access to the interface tables directly. So you could actually create your own interface table before the ones that are available from EBS, prepare the data, massage it, do whatever additions, etc. that you needed, and then push the data into the base tables. And in most cases, pushing it into the base tables had either an existing program or a program that you wrote, which did the job. Now, there were also capabilities where people wrote, PLC blocks. The programs are pretty complex, and you could do a whole host of review of preload data aside from what validation happened within the ERP framework itself. If folks who are familiar with this, remember, you would create what is called as a report set. You would do the build the files, you would write the files, you would transfer the files, and then you would move on, right? So if a lot of you folks on the call are familiar with EBS, you remember that you used to create what's called as, excuse me, report sets, which then would manage all of your activity, right? So in cloud, that way in which almost every data can be done. So you upload it, you process it, and standard function would ensure the data is validated and it will be created in the system. You could do this with both master and transactional data. And there are multiple ways to do that. Like we said in the couple of slides before, you have FPDI templates, you have REST services that you could pull in. So you have a payload that you can use to do transactional data. Most master data is not done using a payload. It's not something that you do immediately. You're only doing this at a bulk. But there are some cases where master data has to be interfaced or pulled into the system almost real time, like maybe customer data, employee data. Some of those things can be required to be almost instantaneous, but you could also do that in a batch manner, end of the day, end of a couple of days, end of the week, however the requirement is for the data to be pulled in. So how do you do this in cloud, right? In the cloud, you actually have these capabilities that we talked about in the previous slide, where you did an SQL loader, you pulled in all of the data, and then you massaged it and did all of that, and you knew what to do about it. So you have the capability to use file import export. That's a screenshot from existing cloud functionality. You actually pull in the data, you pull in where you want to pull in. If you notice there, I've highlighted fin receivables import. This would be auto invoice import capability that you're trying to pull data into the receivables. So if you notice on the list there, I don't know how clear it is, but if you notice, you've got cash management, you've got general ledger, you've got payables, you've got receivables, you've got tax, you've got HCM, etc. So there is a capability that's been provided within the cloud framework, which allows you to almost import and export data from any data set, financials, intercompany, payables, receivables, whatever you see in that list. Then you would actually, for this particular aspect that I'm talking about, I did auto invoice. So I'm going to import auto invoice after that, and I'm going to choose import auto invoice, and it's kind of in the middle of that drop down there. And then based on the fact that I'd already pulled in the data in the file import export from the previous slide deck, you see the list of files that are available for me to pull in, and I would choose that data file and auto invoice would run. Now, just a slight variation on that, and the right hand side bottom, instead of doing the file import export and pushing that file into the various data set areas that you wanted to, you could also do import auto invoice and upload a new file right at the bottom there, and that would also do the same thing that you needed to do here, instead of having to pull the data in. The reason for that is if the data comes in from an external source, you actually would have a service which pushes that data in, and then that way you would actually go ahead and use the firmware process to pull that in. So this capability is available for you for almost every data set, importing payables invoices, importing journal ledger journals, importing auto invoice, obviously, and then you have stuff you can pull in for employees, purchase orders, receipts, almost everything that you needed to do in here. There is a subset of data that you might not have availability, and if you're familiar with the cloud, you actually have updates that happen on a regular basis every quarter, and as the years move on, they're actually adding more and more capability for more and more data sets to be loaded in. 3 years ago, probably you didn't have receipts, for example, that could be pulled in, purchase order receipts, but subsequent to that, a year later, they actually introduced that. And so there's an almost continuous addition of capability, as well as data sets that you could pull in. So if you don't have it today, probably Oracle's working on it, and if you push them hard enough, they'll probably give it to you soon enough. But like we said, every quarter you get a patch and something or the other is added. You got to keep up on that, and I think we spoke about that in multiple sessions, that as these patches and updates happen quarterly, you've got to be on top of what is available and start to use them. It does not, obviously you've got to start using them. You'll have to build some framework around what you would pull in, how you would pull in the data, so that you keep up to date on what's happening. Now, with all of these situations that we talked about, because there's a framework, because there is a set mechanism that you need to use to actually be able to go ahead and integrate data, the challenge that happens to be is that you need to, one, use what's called as an integration platform. If you have an API, the API can be called, and the API has what you would call as a payload. You provide the data in the format that the payload expects, and that API will then pull in that data into the cloud applications or environment and present that to you with what's happening as a normal entry of a transaction. Now, how do you call the API? So for that, you need to have some kind of a platform to be able to do that. You could do that just by writing, commands on the server itself, which you don't have access to. So you do need a platform that will allow you to use those services that get pulled in. And you have options to do this on-prem, SaaS, cloud, whatever works for you. So you could actually have an integration platform that you license and you buy and you install it on your servers in your office, in your location, which is on-prem. You can also have services which are, hosted for you somewhere like AWS. And then you have cloud solutions that actually allow you to link to the cloud, and that can connect to another cloud environment, or just files on your desktop or on your server somewhere in the office network, and then pull it in. So all of those options are available. There are various options available, and we'll summarize these for reference, but I have a link here in this deck, which actually is kind of a link to the top 16 integration platform service vendors, which is something that as a reference you could use. That's the old way that you used to do it. You had API, you had integrations, you had managed services, you had B2B gateways, all of them in manual processes. We could do that. They were siloed. What you did now is, with the ecosystem of integration, which is the platform, you now have a nice modeled and designed platform that you could use, which does your integration for you. What does that integration do? It actually allows you to connect with multiple systems, multiple sources, on-prem applications, cloud applications, SaaS, interface files, whatever. And now it becomes a lot more streamlined. You get the data, you pull it in. You could actually have preload validations if you wanted to. You might need to have to write a report. That's possible for you to write using ODBI to check that. And then you have on the cloud, you have this similar functionality that you had with ADI, which is called ADFDI. You can do journals, you can do assets, you can do AP invoices, and you could load data there. Plus, you have stuff like FBDI templates, which are actual templates that Oracle provides you, which have a certain set of data, the columns that you need to put in place, which will then be used by their interface processes that we just talked about some time back. And then you could pull in data into the interface tables and into the base tables. And it's pretty seamless. But there is a prep work needed. There is an understanding that you need to put in place for what the FBDI templates should have, because they are just Excel files, to say the least, where you plug in data, but you need to know what data you need to plug in. You need to understand the framework that's existing. You need to understand the rules, business rules that you have in place. Those don't get affected in the FBDI templates itself, but they do get affected when you validate them and when you start to load them. So there is an amount of planning on how the data should be provided. It wasn't the case in EBS because you could just pull in and you could do the massaging as you wanted to. But here you got to step back and think about it before. So one of the things from an integration perspective that becomes important from what you do on the cloud is that you actually have to think through how the data is coming in, what the data is going to look like, how the data you expect to see in the system, what connections it has to master data, other data sets in the system. You've got to do that beforehand. So you've got to really plan and design your integrations a little bit before you start it. And then you have API REST and SOAP services, which then you use through an integration platform, which then does the job for you. What does an integration platform do?
So Mohan, can I just ask you, can you give an example maybe on where you didn't need to think and now you need to think, like customers or invoices or something? Can you give an example of where you can?
Well, just think about the fact that you're getting in sales orders or you're getting transactional data, and you had some set data in that transactional data which is expected to pick up information that's an item or a price list or something like that, and it was not accurate, so it would fail. So you have to think about what options are available, what's available to these customers or these data types, because you have in some cases the rules you built within the system would be that, you know, and it's not rules that are systematically stopped, but it's a business rule for these type of orders. If this is the order type that I'm, or if this type of sale I'm doing,
type, or you need a term or that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, okay. Exactly. So you could actually fix that on the fly in EBS. You can't really do that now because now you're stuck. You got to pull that back, fix the data, and then load it again.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Now, to your point, and I'm happy you asked that question. To your point, I will come back to show you how the integration platform will help you do that. Okay. So just hold the thought for a little bit, and it might.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get. Thank you.
Okay. So why integration scenarios? Again, enterprise organizations are leading towards consolidation of companies in a major way. And what happens in that sense is that a lot of companies, even though when they merge initially, these companies, if they're large enough, they have their own systems. And because they have their own system, it's going to be difficult for you to combine and merge all of them into one single platform that you probably have. So it's going to be a long-term exercise to do that. In the meantime, there could be situations where they will continue to use it. And if those systems or of those companies are pretty siloed and pretty specific and unique, you may have to have them use continuously their existing system. So probably that's one of the things. And then because you're using multiple systems, you need to integrate data. The classic example is when you have employee data. Most companies at least in the US, use a form of an HR service provider. Let's take US for an example. A US company uses ADP in most situations. And if ADP contains all your employee data and it does all of your employee payroll, etc., your master for your employee record could then be ADP in that sense. And then you would need to get all of the data in from ADP as an employee into your Oracle ERP, because you need, quote unquote, an employee in the system to do some of the transactions and some of the activities that you need. Plus, you need to know what the hierarchy of that employee is from a perspective of approving transactions, etc. So you need to get data from there. And this also drives, like I said, real-time and periodic loads. You can choose what data set you want to load in real time and what data you want to have loaded periodically. Master data, transactional data, consolidation data for reporting, extracts to external agencies for various support activities, like you have payments that go through to the bank. You may need to send ACH and wire files to the bank for the payments. You may have to send some financial data for reporting to other external agencies. You may want to send orders that you have booked in your system to your third-party provider, your logistics provider, for shipping. And then you might get shipping information back from them. That's transactional data. And then master data, typical master data that comes to mind: employees, customers, sometime vendors, and then other information that you would have if you have an external or a different PIM system where you define items that might actually need to be pulled in for you to actually transact in your manufacturing activity, as plus your actual sales activity. So there's a lot of scenarios where you have data that needs to be interchanged. Some of them is master data, some of them is transactional. Again, that drives, how often and how frequently you want to pull in the data. And how do you integrate? There are some scenarios that need immediate integrations. Like I said, some can wait. And then the integration platforms are what allow you to do that and do some amount of work. And to your point, Hans, in the next couple of slides, we'll come to that. These are a few options of the integration platforms that you have available. And they're called differently: integration platform, integration service, integration, software, however you want to call them. And I just put these out, a few of them, and this is the magic quadrant from Gartner for some of the integration platforms that you have and where they stand within their magic quadrant, right? And obviously this report is available, and you could actually read through them briefly to give you a very high level understanding of what they can and cannot do. So to Hans, to your point, what happens and how do you manage to get this in place? What does an integration platform allow you to do? It actually allows you to connect two systems. It allows you to get data from them, transform it, accelerate, integrate, and visualize. All of this can be done in the integration platform as it progresses from one system to the other, right? The resolving should be probably done before you pull it into your system, but there are some cases where the resolving can be done after you put it into the system. But in most cases, it's better to do it before. And so this is exactly the steps that you actually get from an integration platform. But the services have still got to be available. The way you transform, the way you integrate is through services. So REST APIs, visualize in the integration platform, and then you resolve, right? A couple of the things that actually jump out when you do the integration platforms: they integrate, they automate, and they orchestrate. And that's the key. The orchestration is the key, because you're allowed, based on the orchestration, you connect, you use transformation logic, you move things along, you integrate into the system, into the target system, you visualize if there's a problem before you do that, resolve it, and move ahead, right? And obviously timing, etc., plays into that. And what do integration platforms do? They allow you to connect using existing APIs and publish business events. And I think if you had attended the previous session last month, which Seamus had provided, he had said that one of the things that allows you to be seamlessly able to integrate is publish and subscribe terminology, which is something that's possible for you to use with the integration platforms. And then what do you have there? You have connectors, you have mapping, which is the transformation piece. You have workflow to orchestrate what needs to happen. You have error handling and synchronization back and forth. So when you actually push something in with a REST API, you actually get a payload which tells you this is the data you're sending in, and you actually are in a position to get back information about what was successful, which you can then orchestrate within your integration platform to provide visibility to the person who sent the data, whether it was successful or not, if there were any errors, etc. Right? Excuse me. Sorry. So pub sub capability, and I think this is something that's, I'm not sure if this is something that's been talked about too much, but I remember way back when there were systems that actually had this capability, but they were within their own little environments. Like Sun had this pub sub capability, which means that you publish as a data owner, ADP system, who owns the data for employees, publishes employee data, which is very specifically a published event, and that event is, let's say, called employee creation. And the published events will have published event data or data sets, which are responsible for employees to be used in other systems, like employee name, employee number, employee, some of the capabilities that you want, where he sits in the hierarchy, who is the manager, who are his direct reports, what departments he is attached to, etc. All of that thing gets published. And the systems that are around in your environment then get to subscribe to those. Now, you could have events that get published, and there could be that you could restrict that, but subscribing to this is not restricted generally, but there could be things that you could actually have as part of the publishing capability to say, hey, I do not want to have this particular system use this. Typically, that's not what you would do, but assuming that that's a need, you could do that. And mature systems actually use this kind of integration mechanism. So you have a platform, you have a published event that comes across, and then you pick it up and use it within your system, right? And the publishing capability actually provides you enough information to be able to use that particular data set in your system. You may not use all the information that's published, but at least you will have enough information that you can use within your system. And Oracle actually has public business events that get pushed, and there is a link here which actually tells you, what the overview of business events is. I've given an example of a payables invoice, and you could actually use the published event of an invoice creation, which would give you all of the invoice information that you need when it gets created to be used in other systems if you need to, or an update or a status that some change has happened, on hold, it's been canceled, or a payment has been made, etc. Right? And a business event signal is created only when using an interface or REST API. So when you do this on the system UI, that's the time when a business event signal is created, or you use a REST API. SOAP APIs do not create that, and that's one of the reasons why I put that out there. And then you actually have what we call as business events. There's a list. There's a list for each of these data sets that you can actually look at and figure out what they give you. It's a published business event, gives you the data set that you can use. A payload gets provided and published, and then you pick it up and subscribe to whatever information you want from there. Here's an example of some of the adapters, and this is a screen from some people who are actually using this would recognize this. This is a screen from Boomi on the left-hand side, and there's an ERP connectivity that they published saying that these are the connectivities they have to the HCM world, ERP connectivity, CX, enterprise messaging. And this is what an integration platform allows you to do. It actually has adapters inbuilt to be able to connect to these, which means that they have the data sets, they have the capability to connect directly to these. They know what events are published, and they can pick up and say, hey, if you want to connect with DocuSign, if you want to connect with Twilio, or you want to connect with UiPath, here are the pieces that you need to give us, and you could pick that up and use it. Going back to Oracle Integration Cloud, I wanted to put that out there because you do have the capability to connect to Oracle Enterprise Integration Cloud and use that, that's a licensed product, as opposed to the others that I showed in the previous slides. It does the same thing, and there are obviously they tout that as being something that they can directly connect with, Oracle ERP on the cloud, and they say, hey, we could use this. It's not a big deal, and you could buy this. Obviously, it's a separate license. You need to actually host a different SaaS cloud environment. It's not directly connected to your ERP. It's a separate box, etc. So there is a connectivity aspect to it, and they have pre-built adapters, accelerators, and recipes that you could put in. What's an accelerator? It's actually creating a particular transaction on the fly. A recipe is a complete flow of a transaction which you can use, right? Those, and there's a lot of documentation that's available online that you could actually go ahead and figure out how this can be used. But there is, again, to my point, and to Hans's question, you need to actually design this before you start to use the data and pull them in. So there's an amount of design aspect that needs to be done based on that. What does it do? This is the Oracle integration capability that happens on the top. At the bottom, some of you may recognize that that's actually a mapping and transformation logic screenshot. Looks a little squiggly, looks like a lot of spiders going back and forth, but that's a mapping capability that you do between what you're getting from the field and what you're pulling in to Oracle in the tables and the fields you have on the right hand side. That's a Boomi screenshot, just for reference. And kind of the fact that these integration platforms were not that prevalent maybe 10 years ago. Not that you couldn't use it with EBS today. You can use even these platforms, not necessarily that you have to use them with the cloud. You can actually use them with EBS as well. It just means that now you have a more formal and a more methodical way of trying to integrate data between two systems or different systems at the same time. So it was just that it's an additional overhead, it's an additional cost. And because there was a capability to do what you needed to do with EBS, with the access to the backend tables, this was not unnecessary. Now it's a necessity because on the cloud, you don't have access to the tables, and you have to use something like this, which uses APIs and REST APIs to do that. Coming back to what Thomas said, that we would also be at Ascend 2023 in Orlando, Florida. I just put in a couple of the sessions that I think are either related to integration or related to the people who are part of this panel. The functionality difference between EBS and Fusion Cloud Financials, that's something that I am presenting on June 11th at 3:45. The last one, Oracle Cloud Reporting Masterclass Redux, is something that Thomas is presenting. And then the two in the middle are kind of related to integration. So I thought it might be a good idea to kind of put them out there. So if you needed to actually take a look and attend some additional sessions, which might give you a little more actionable information on how actually these integrations work, because we haven't gone into the detail. Some of these sessions may go into a little more detail than what we have. And so that kind of brings me to the end of the session. I just wanted to put that out there, and obviously there are questions, and we have the email contacts of the folks that are part of this panel, and you could reach out to either of us. Plus, you can actually go ahead and put in your questions in the panel now, and we'll try and answer them.
Yeah, we have a few questions here. Let's see. Can we add preload validations to both ADFDI and FBDI?
You will have to do those preload validations before you prepare the files, because once you actually have the files in ADFDI or FBDI and you load them in the system, you're actually running a process which does all of it and creates the transaction in the system. So if you wanted to do some preload validations, you'll have to stop that process and not do that, not do the next step. And that is not possible unless you do something which is similar to what you do in EBS. So most of the preload validation will have to happen prior to you actually preparing the file. It's not easy.
What-
It's possible. It's not easy to stop that process midstream.
What we typically do is, this is Tom, by the way, is if we're using Oracle Integration Cloud Service, and we've got what we call them automated interfaces, right? So you want to get an automated load of your invoices using auto import. As Mohan said, you really use a similar process that you would use in EBS. You load them into a staging table into Integration Cloud Service. You do your validations there, and then for those records that pass, you format them into a CSV file, per the file-based data load, and then you load it into the system. Great question.
Thanks. Can cloud send files to FTP server or receive files from the FTP server? If so, how to configure FTP server in cloud?
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Mohan. No, I was going to say I'll let you give a shot, and then I can certainly comment after that.
So yes, you can. You can send files to an FTP server. You can pick up files from an FTP server. You will need, like I said, an integration mechanism to do that, which could be an integration platform. But it is possible to pick up files from an FTP server and send them to an FTP server as well. There is some configuration required to do that, but yes, the capability is there.
What guidance can you provide to organizations just beginning their EBS to Oracle Cloud Applications journey regarding purchase of an integration platform?
I'm sorry?
Oh,
No, go ahead.
What guidance can you provide to organizations just beginning their EBS to Oracle Cloud Applications journey regarding purchase of an integration platform? At what point should an organization adopt an integration platform? What are the critical factors to consider adoption?
I think those are, let me break that into three different pieces and try to answer that one by one. The first one is, what guidance can we provide to a company going on to EBS to cloud? I think that's a question for all of us. We've been trying to do that as much as we can using these sessions. And I think that's a kind of a wider question as to what guidance we can provide. If you have specific questions, we can provide guidance. If there's a opportunity for us to come in and help you, that's great too. But if you have some questions that are specific, we could probably answer that. But it's a pretty broad question as to what guidance we can provide. There's so many things that you need to think about, starting with, do you need to go to the cloud, right? I mean, if you ask Oracle, they will say yes. And if you ask us, we may say possibly. So it's kind of an open-ended question. Thomas, Lee, do you want to add something to that?
I just wanted to say something, Mohan, which is, okay, one sec, Tom, I'm going to be quick.
Please go ahead.
There is not just yes and no. There's also, maybe you don't do it as a big bang, maybe you do it. We had a number of seminars and webinars about these different issues, and the longer we do this kind of thing, the more variations are available. So I think in opening conversation about this, if you really wanted to discuss it, would be great. And we can then concentrate on your company, and we will ask you a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you,
I was actually going to say something similar. So there's no, I think one of the biggest reasons that we, as a group, wanted to do this webinar, look, we all make our money from Oracle, and it's important that we know the applications. But the fact is that Oracle Cloud may not be right for your organization for a lot of reasons. EBS still has a lot of tread on the tires, and it's good conversations to have. And we've done a number of these, Oracle on-prem to cloud webinars over the years. This is, one form or another, this is probably the 15th or 20th that I've done, not just with these guys. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. It does require some analysis, and it requires some objective thinking, meaning, if your organization is not willing to change or not able to change some business processes, then you really have to take a look at the cloud, because the cloud is all about configuration, not customization. Even though you can customize in the cloud, you can extend, you can modify using integration cloud servers. There's a lot of things you can do, personalizations. you really have to be willing to modify your business processes, and you have to take a really kind of hard look at it. So it's a conversation that is good. And as we said earlier, if any folks on this are attending Ascend next month, we will certainly be there to have a conversation about it. Jamie, back to you.
Oh, thank you. I think there was a third portion to this question. So the second question was, when should the company start looking at integration platforms? Is that correct, Jamie?
Yeah, that was the second question. And
Yeah.
the third one was, what is your opinion for the criteria?
Correct. So the second question about when is, obviously, if you have multiple systems, you need to start thinking about it and wonder whether you need an integration platform, or you're going to do that with just file uploads, which is also a possibility. You can't automate much, but that's also a possibility. So I think the question about when you should start looking at it is when you start to think about what you have currently. If you are integrating from other systems, then you probably need to think about how you're going to move that to the cloud when you go there. So I think the safe answer to that is, almost when you start planning your migration, you need to think about, what platform you use.
If I can just add one thing, or your opinion about it. It seems like it should not be completely dependent whether you go to the cloud, because some of your systems that you're integrating with, maybe Oracle is not in the cloud, but other systems might be in the cloud already. So I think, if you have Salesforce, you have something in the cloud. So it might not be dependent on that you go to the cloud. This integration platform can work with EBS also.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Hans. And then the third question about what was the third question? What you would
Now, what are the criteria? What do you prefer? I wanted to ask this also, because you showed Boomi. You showed Boomi. It was interesting.
Yeah. So Hans, I have a strong preference for integration cloud service, and I know that sounds trite, but I really do. I find that it works. It's really easy to work with, especially if you're working with Oracle. If you use, especially if you're, the enterprise adapters that they come out with, just working with Salesforce, the pre-built adapters that are in cloud are really, really good. The time it takes to stand those up is really small. So I have a preference for integration cloud, not just because I'm an Oracle guy. We are doing a project right now with Boomi, and we've done projects with MuleSoft, and they all have their pluses and minuses. But I can't say a bad word. I'm not a true tech guy. I'm a quasi tech guy, just enough to get in trouble. But I'm a big fan of
the Oracle
of Oracle Integration Cloud. I think it does a nice job.
That's great.
And so just to add to that, I kind of second what Thomas is saying. It is easy to stand up and start working on that. But if you already have, to Hans's point, if you already have something that you're using, there's value in thinking about whether you can continue to use Boomi, for example, if you already use Boomi at your customer site, or if you use Workato or something else, right? So I think it becomes dependent on your technical team, because if they have to learn something new, they're always going to say, hey, why? And so it's more of what is your best bet if you're already using something, and if it doesn't work with the integration that you're planning on, then obviously you need to think through looking at something new. But if it's going to work and it can be used, and you have skill set that have been supporting that, you may want to continue to use that. There's nothing against that. I think that was the three-part question, I guess.
That was
we answered all of them.
All right. How can you automate loading a file, like dropping to a folder instead of uploading it manually?
How you'd use the integration platform to which will then connect, pick it up from there. And it's possible to do that with OIC or with any of the other integration platforms that we kind of put out there.
The file folders you showed in one of your screenshots for FBDI, do they exist, or are you required to create those as part of your setups for various modules?
The file folders, I'm sorry, let me go back. Are you talking about, let me go back a little bit here. Sorry, it's taking a little longer than I thought. Talking about these,
I think so.
excuse me. So there are two places. This is where the folder was, where you actually see something which this is all set up. You don't need to do any of this. Everything that you see here, like I said, comes up. If you don't, let's assume that you didn't have payables import, for example. You can't set it up. Typically what would happen is that a patch would come in and they would actually give you the capability to do that, and it'll suddenly show up here. So these are all already set up. None of this had to be set up by us during the implementation.
So Mohan, if I can just jump in there as well. So the purpose of this discussion was integrations and talking through how you do integrations. Some companies still don't do integrations, but we need to use some of this functionality, like the file-based, the FBDI files, the file-based data load files, to get, I don't know, suppliers in, to get your budget balances in, to upload, 50,000 assets or whatever. So you would still take those file-based data load files, those FBDI files, populate them with all your data, and then use this exact same methodology that Mohan is showing on the screen here to upload the file, to put it into, in this case, the receivables import file, so I could run my auto invoice. I would still put it out there.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Lee.
You're welcome.
Does that answer the question? I'm
I
hoping
think it does, Mohan. That's what he was. There was one other slide that had the different options. The one after that, I think.
yes.
Yeah,
It's not different options. The file is already in those particular folders, and these are the processes that pull them in.
Okay.
Yeah. So based on the other screen we had, where we were saying we were loading a file to, I think it was receivables import, we're now trying to run the load interface file for import. And you can see that there are four different file processes there for bringing in receivables information in. So there is bringing in a lockbox file, importing trading community data in bulk, which is customers, bringing in credit data, bringing in auto invoice. Those four processes are all available once you've loaded files into that up into that receivables inbound.
Okay. The preload validation, is that all standard validation, or will it allow you to add some custom validation?
The preload validation is something that I said you did as part of what you did in EBS. In the cloud, like we talked about, when you push data in here for the auto invoice import, the FBDI file or the file layout that they provide you has all the columns that are needed, and there will also be comments in that to tell you what's absolutely essential and what's mandatory to push in there. So that's all of that you do will then get pulled in here. Once you run the next program, which is import auto invoice, if there is something that's wrong and that data doesn't exist for that will throw out in the import auto invoice. So that's now using standard functionality that pulls in the data into import auto invoice. So there is no preload validation capability within this framework. Before you create this file, if you want to do some validation, preload validation that you would like to have happen before you bring in the invoices, you will have to do that outside of the system, because you can't stop this, start into this and into the transactions screen. You cannot enter anything here, nor can you add pieces that you would like to do yourself. That's not possible in the cloud. That's what I said, that the preload validation that you did in EBS was something that you stopped the import auto invoice, did your validation, massaged the file in the auto invoice interface, and then loaded into the system, because you had to add some DFFs, which had extraneous data. You had to do some other validation and do some other massaging to change the data. All of that cannot happen once you start this process on the left-hand side, which is import process.
There are still quite a few more questions. Did you want to keep going, or do you want to answer these?
We can go for another couple of minutes, and then if there are questions, if you could send us the questions, we'll respond back to those folks via email. I know we are kind of a little over the hour, but we could probably do another couple of minutes, maybe till 11:05 or something. I don't know if Thomas and Lee and Hans have other things, but I do have some time I can spend.
I got a few minutes, Mohan. I can hang out with you.
Okay, thanks.
The guidance question is specifically in regards to Oracle Cloud applications purchased with integration platform purchase. Is it advisable to try to get by without an integration platform?
Is it advisable to get by without an integration platform? That's
I wouldn't.
a pretty broad question, because I don't know what integrations you already have in place, what you would need. If you do not need to automate, and like Lee said, you could actually do what we talked about. I would still have a file, I would still load it into this place, and I would still run this process, and I would get the data in. That's an integration technically. And if you were not needing to do that and you're willing to do that manually, then you don't need an integration platform. But if you have multiple integrations, if you have multiple files that come in, if you have more than one or two or a handful of integrations that you need to perform on a regular basis, especially, I mean, if you just are doing master data and you want to do it once a day, you probably might be able to get away with not having an integration platform. But if you
Or
have,
if it's like once a month, you have the payroll journal, one time a month the GL journal, and that's all you need.
right,
It's probably fine. But who has that? Not many.
yeah. So
Yep. So
question is-
I'll second that. Just so this is kind of, again, from a consulting standpoint, when our clients ask us to build an integration, the first thing I usually look at is what Hans just said. How often do you actually run this thing? If you're running an integration, once a month, as Hans said, then you know what, you probably can just run it manually and doing it. If you're doing it multiple times a day or multiple times a week, it probably makes sense to, take the time and build the thing and do it the right way. And that means some kind of platform so it's easier to manage.
Did you want me to go on to the next one?
Sure.
yes, please.
Sure.
Does it make sense if migrating to the cloud to go module by module?
Oof.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Thomas, I think we've had this discussion multiple times as to
Yeah.
goes back to big
We
bad
have
module.
indeed.
Depends on the module. Let me put it that way. Depends on the module. You can, so let me take the easy way out. Yeah, you can do that. You can just do GL and that's one module. It does give you benefits, and we've talked about the benefits of doing that and using the reporting capabilities that come out of the Cube and Smart View and FR reports and stuff like that. That's a possibility, which means that you're assimilating all of your financial information from a balances and journals perspective into the cloud, and then you're using the reporting capabilities of the cloud to do that. You may continue to remain on EBS for everything else, and then you do this. And yes, you wouldn't do module by module. I would think you would do
Right.
flow by flow. You would do P2P, and then you would do O2C, and you would choose which is the most complex one and do that in a manner. It does create challenges from how you manage operations, but I think that's on a case by case basis. I don't think we can generalize and say this is probably the best way to do it.
So let me just pipe in with one thing. If you do it not complete, then you certainly need an integration platform. The other thing is so Seamus and I had a lot of heartache on an implementation. They just did accounts payable and they left the general ledger in EBS. So everything else was in EBS. And it was like we had to dumb down basically the cloud accounts payable to get back to the org structure of the general ledger in EBS. So if you do any financial module, I think it should be either just GL or anything else with GL. Don't do it without the GL.
And that's a critical part that Hans brings up there. If it's anything other than GL, you still have to set up GL. So even,
Right.
and I apologize to my HCM folks, because your HCM folks, it's people in jobs, I get that, still need a ledger. So you still have to set up general ledger anyway. If I do accounts payable, have to have ledger. If I set up purchasing, have to have a ledger out there. So, it's the days of just one is a little bit tricky. As the team has said, looking at a flow kind of makes more sense. So, doing everything in EBS and having GL, absolutely, I get on board with that. You've got your GL structure there, you're getting all the cool reporting, and yeah, we'll do payables and receivables, whatever. But you've got to, go for a flow first. That's going to help you out the most.
All right, we have a comment here. I wish we had talked with this group before we went to cloud in 2017. Another question, in what different cases, scenarios, is required or not required to have OIC as part of the common ERP cloud integrations?
I'm sorry, I didn't actually quite get the question. They went to cloud in 2017.
No, that was just a comment. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
So
that was separate. The question is, in what different cases, scenarios, it's required or not required to have OIC as part of the common ERP cloud integration?
I don't think it's required. Like Thomas said, he likes the fact that it works kind of seamlessly out of the box with the Oracle ERP cloud. You don't need, I don't think that they sell OIC along with the cloud license unless they feel that there's a need for it. So it's not a requirement. But if you have integration needs, you need something, and OIC is an option. And to Tom's call that he made, it is nice to have it available because it works kind of out of the box and it's easy to stand up.
Yep.
Wow, a lot of questions.
Okay, Jamie, I think it's 10 past, so I'm not sure about whether there are too many more questions or not, but you know, like we could probably take one more, and then if there's others, you know, send the email to us with the questions and we'll try and respond back.
Okay, here's one more. In what different cases, scenarios it's required? Oh, I just asked that one. Hang on, there's so many here.
No, that was it. That was the last question.
Yeah.
That was not, just so we're clear, that wasn't us. That was Jamie.
That was me. In your cloud migration experience, do you recommend Oracle's SOA marketplace for managed file transfer, specifically to address the previous FTP setup question?
Oracle's SOA marketplace. I don't know off the top of my head what that is. So I may have to go back and think about it. Thomas Lee, do you?
So there was a question about FTP configuration. I will say again, I'll go back to Integration Cloud. Integration Cloud does come with an FTP server, an SFTP server. You can configure it. It's relatively straightforward to deploy. The one drawback I would say, and I don't know if it's a drawback, it's just reality, is that it doesn't use a standard SFTP port. So anyone that's ever configured SFTP, you know, the default port is 22. They actually don't let you use port 22. Actually, you know, I guess that's maybe because if you use a different port, it's hard for people to get into. But I know on the marketplace, in the Oracle marketplace, there are a number of pre-built integrations that are really, really well done that plug right into OIC as well as their own platforms. So I've had good experience on the marketplace. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but if not, as Mohan said, most of us are going to be in Florida. Welcome to come look at us. Mohan's doing a presentation. Lee and I are doing a presentation on Tuesday morning on reporting in cloud. It's a redo of a session that we did about 5 years ago that got really good feedback. Hans, where are you going to be so that people can find you at the session?
I'm going to hang out around your booth. Do you have a booth? Or I don't have a session. I'm just going to be floating.
All right. Well, you know, Hans has the Multinational Cigarettes website. Hans is on LinkedIn. Mohan's on LinkedIn. Lee and I are both on LinkedIn. Our emails were in the beginning of this. This will be posted on the OUTG website very shortly after the conclusion of this webinar. I'd like to thank everybody for getting together. As Mohan said, there will be an in-person session presented during Sunday at the Ascend conference. We hope to see you guys there. Jamie, back to you. Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you so much, Thomas, Lee, Mohan, Hans, and Seamus for presenting. I will make sure to get you these questions so you can follow up with those that haven't been answered.
Sure. Thank you very much for everybody to attend, and hope you have a wonderful weekend, and looking forward to seeing you folks in Florida if you're traveling there.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Enjoy your weekend.
Jamie, I'll send you this in a bit.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.